Hey, welcome to my channel. I'm Ty King. I'm a podcast producer and a public speaker and someone that just likes to tell stories. I think that everybody has something interesting to learn from everyone else's story. Nobody has a beginning, a middle, or an end like you do. So everybody stands to learn something about your story, your experiences, how you were raised, what happened, what are your triumphs, what are your tragedies, what are the valleys, what are the mountains that you've climbed, and we want to know. The thing is, people want to know your story. They want to relate. And so whenever you tell somebody else's story, when we're assisting in that, you're helping somebody else learn from that experience. And it helps shape the rest of their lives based on that. I'm so used to interviewing other people that I've written questions to interview myself. So how do I approach the concept of storytelling when dealing with complex or darker aspects of human nature? And so that's one of the more interesting parts of telling somebody's story, is to really dig into their past, not to vilify somebody, but to take somebody's actual story from their life and find out, what are those valleys? What are those lows that they reached before? Was it from their own actions, or was it as a result of somebody else's actions? Regardless, nobody is a saint. Nobody's well, they're actual saints, right? So, but nobody actually lives and lives a full life and does not mess up somewhere along the way, right? We hurt people, we let people down. It's just human nature. And so when we tell the abbreviated versions of somebody's story, we don't hit on those things, and those people just come off as like, these are the great things that I did. I lived my life this way, and there was never a bump in the road. Or like the bump in the road was something really small. You know what I mean? We're sort of washing that history, and it makes that person's story that we're trying to tell, it makes them into something unrealistic. It's more of a side character than it is a main character. If you think about how we relate to characters in film and books and audio podcasts that are in fiction, we tend to focus on the main feelings of the main character, right? And we focus on, what have they been through? What are those struggles? If you think about, of course, the hero's journey, right? There's a full circle of storytelling there, where the hero has to hit a low in order to learn how to climb high and then gain all these skills so that they can conquer and come home, right? If we are skipping past that point, then we're basically telling the story of a side character. You're an NPC, right? Non-playable character for you don't play video games. We're telling a vanilla story that has none of the flavor. It is less impactful. It is less meaningful. And so, we tell the darker parts of their lives because we don't want to vilify them, but we also don't want to make them appear to be an angel, because that is the uncanny valley effect, where if you've ever seen bad computer graphics in a movie where it appears like somebody's face isn't in the right position, or their eyes are just looking a little bit off, but it looks realistic enough, but there's something there that's not quite right. That's the same thing with telling somebody's story. You want to be sure to tell those darker parts of somebody's story, because everybody has that. It's traditional to not address those types of things that we've been through publicly, because that might change the way that people perceive us, right? But that was before the age of social media. In the age of social media, anything you've done in your past is public knowledge. And in an age of what people call cancel culture, or bringing to light any kind of wrongdoings in the past, like, it's easy to let the world know the things that you've done. So by skimming over those, you're still not getting away from it. Somebody's going to find out. So you might as well address it. And those stories of people that don't touch on those things, like, it stands out as something that doesn't feel real or relatable, right? Because everybody's got some sort of dirt in their past. Everybody's had to overcome something. So bringing those shadows of your past and overcoming those to make friends with them, to use them in the story of your life, because like it or not, those are the parts of your story. The people that rise to success, however you gauge that, every one of them has a dark spot in their history. It's just human nature. When exploring the dark side of individuals, how do I strive to create nuanced and multidimensional characters or stories? Many of the interviews I do, I try to be careful. And when I'm asking them about a part of their past they didn't expect, because I do want those dark spots to come out, to humanize them, not to vilify them. And if they're taken aback, I will add, well, you can talk as little or as much about this experience as you'd like. It helps them have more control over the conversation rather than feel like they've been assaulted or blindsided and now they're in a position where they have to tell this thing that they may not feel comfortable about. Now they have a choice. Well, I could just not say anything. So they feel more comfortable whenever they make the decision themselves to be like, okay, well, I will tell that part of my story. And there's a level of trust between you and the person's story that you're telling, in that they don't know what you're going to do when you start editing this video. And so the conversation can be great in person, but they are trusting you to take that story they just told you and to edit it in a proper way, right? Not to chop it up and not to put it out of context, but to tell the story the same way that they told you the story, right? If they decide that they don't want that to be in the public purview, after all, they can always tell you that, and you can always go back and take that out before you post your podcast episodes, right? Whether you're filming a document or recording a documentary style podcast or you're doing an interview style podcast, either way, no matter what you're doing, you always give them an option to tell their story. It gives them more control, they feel more comfortable, and you're going to get a real version of the story. How do I navigate the line between making a character relatable and avoiding the risk of glorifying negative behavior? That's tricky, especially when you're talking about people in recovery from substance abuse. We're currently working on a podcast that deals specifically with that. These individuals with lived experience are telling their stories and then telling their success stories. Sometimes when we post those people's stories, we get backlash from certain people, but it's the internet. You can pretty much expect that everything's going to get some sort of negative review or a thumbs down or a negative comment. This video will get a negative comment somewhere along the lines because I've said something that offended somebody, right? It's so hard to tell somebody's story, especially somebody that has been through things like addiction, and to show so many of the similar stories where we are showing the ones that are the successes. And like I realized that we are talking to the ones who have had serious success, but we can't talk to the ones that didn't have a success, because they're either gone because of the consequences of their actions or they're in prison. And so we navigate that line of being between making a character relatable and avoiding the risk of glorifying negative behavior by allowing them to tell the story. We don't swing the story one way or the other. And also, if they have a story that is highly relatable and everything that they say has turned out great, it's aces for them, right? At the end, also interview somebody who might have an alternative view on how those things could have turned out. It helps put things into perspective, and it makes a healthy balance. And you're telling the full story. You're not telling just one side. That everybody, for instance, everybody in addiction comes out on the other side as being, highly employable, and they find success and they restore the relationships of their lives, because That's a small case. I understand. So we also have to have some of those other stories. And so bringing in an expert, maybe somebody that works in government that wants to be all about the numbers, or knows of some success stories, but also wants to add in some other clarifications about the majority of what happens most of the time. And it's not a pretty story, right? When dealing with real life stories or individuals with challenging backgrounds, how do I ensure the ethical storytelling without exploiting their struggles? It's a tough line, especially when you're talking about recording the story of people who have been through some incredibly difficult times, many times by their own hand, right? Again, talking about the people that have been through addiction, that was a choice. They didn't see very many options, but still they made a choice in that, and it was very destructive. They found a part of them that belonged somewhere for the first time, and so these recovery services are having a really hard time in not just reaching down and picking somebody up out of the dirt, but what they really have to do is to dig the shovel in and uproot the individual from that community and make them feel like they belong somewhere else. And many of them are doing it very successfully. To ensure the ethical storytelling part and not just exploiting, we make sure to go the complete circle. In how did you start? How did your addiction begin? How did you make all these choices? What happened? What do you think led up to that decision? What's happened since then? Let's go back now and let's think about some other factors that led to your success and how you came out of that. What if those things hadn't existed before? Where do you think you would be now? What would you say to yourself back then, since you've lived this entire life since those events? Another thing is clickbait headlines. When you're posting your episodes, the ethics of what you title your episodes and the descriptions of your episodes and how you market that episode, there are a lot of ethics that go into that, right? Some of the most successful episodes I've seen of people telling somebody's story that had a darker side, they used clickbait headlines. And so they lean into it, like, gang member affiliated with this cries on screen for the first time, or running the mafia from behind bars, or crazy things. They really highlight that one bad spot. And so when they're telling that person's story, they are really focusing in on the darkest times of their life, and they're exploiting that by putting that forward as what they market the episode as, because they know that that will get people's attention. And they're right, it does. When you put a negative headline out there and make somebody seem really dangerous, it's so easy to get those views off of that. But as anything else with ethics, can you sleep better at night when you use clickbait headlines, or do you sleep better by knowing you've done justice with this person's story, right? I am of the camp where I will sacrifice the views in order to tell a good story. I won't take the easy route because it feels gross. I have even worked for other people and try to produce some headlines for them that would be in that realm, and I couldn't do it. I told them no. I tried, and I was like, I understand that this is how you get the views, but in the end, I couldn't make myself do it. It just felt absolutely disgusting. One more thing I want to say about telling somebody's story and addressing the shadows of their past is that as a society, we're sort of trained to not talk about those, right? When you meet somebody, they say, hey, how are you? And you say, I'm doing great. But we're not always doing great. We're not honest. So we're pre-programmed with a lot of these answers, which it's the niceties, it's manner as we're supposed to appear. But it goes beyond that, and that we're almost afraid to tell other people our stories of the darkest times, right? But that's something you get to over time. Like you meet somebody and then you get friendly with them, and then over time you start telling your story, right? It's hard to be the interviewer and ask somebody to sit down and record their story so that the world can see it. But I think that when we are talking about those shadows and the dark times of people's stories, that we're doing them a service as well. We're helping other people relate, of course, because nobody has a beginning, a middle, or an ending like you do. Everybody stands to learn something from you. But when we don't talk about those times, then we're sort of building up this monster inside of us, right? Those dark things that are inside of everybody, whether we address them or not. But when we don't address them, we build up a monster on the inside, and we're afraid. We're afraid to let that out. And so there are triggers, there are places, things, taste, all the senses that could make that darkest part of you come out at any point, right? But we're afraid of that. And so we're afraid to talk about it. But I think by talking about it, by addressing it, making it public, we're sort of depowering that monster. And we're acknowledging that it's there. And not that we're perfect or we're infallible, but by saying that we are very fallible and that we've had a dark past, things that we regret, we've let people down. Let's talk about those things. Because if we don't, it builds up something inside. And then the bottle just pops one day, right? By addressing all those things, then we're depowering the monster inside. So that those triggers aren't nearly as effective. That dark side that we're afraid of isn't nearly as strong as what we originally thought. We're taking its power away. We're telling an interesting, original story, and we're helping other people do the same. You're doing a service to yourself. You're doing a service to everyone else, and there is a ripple effect to that. So don't be afraid to tell your dark side of your story. Don't be afraid to ask your interviewees about dark parts, but also give them the option to talk as little or as much about that. Thanks for watching. I'm going to be posting more storytelling tips throughout the coming months. This is a new channel, new show. I've been a podcaster forever, but I'm usually on the other side of the camera and asking people questions. This is completely new, but speaking on stage is not new for me. In fact, you can catch me at Podcast Movement Evolutions in LA in March, where I'll be talking about storytelling. And I hope to incorporate a lot of the things that we're going to be talking here on this channel about. So please like, subscribe, follow. I hope that something I said today has helped you in your storytelling journey. And please leave a comment. Let me know what you'd like to know about in storytelling. I've told a lot of people stories, continue to do so. I love it. I enjoy it. And I'm sure there's so many of you out there that would like to do that as well. And I'd like to lend any kind of help that I possibly can. All right. See you.